The first time my husband tried to erase me, he did it with a seating card. It was cream-colored, thick paper, hand-lettered in gold ink, and it had my name written beside the word staff. Not wife. Not family. Not even guest. Staff. I remember staring at that card for a full 3 seconds while a waiter in a black vest adjusted champagne flutes behind me and my mother-in-law pretended not to notice my face. The ballroom smelled like white roses and polished wood. Someone was testing a microphone near the stage. My husband, Daniel, was across the room in a navy tuxedo, smiling at donors and board members like this whole night belonged to him. I'm Claire Maddox. I'm 36 years old, and that was the night I realized my marriage had already been converted into a story where I was useful, but no longer visible. Daniel's exact words, when I quietly asked him why I wasn't seated with him, were, "Please don't make this awkward." We needed to balance the table. Needed to balance the table. Like I was a centerpiece that didn't fit. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked down at the card again, then at the round table in the back corner where I'd apparently been placed with 2 catering supervisors, a floral assistant, and a woman from event security who gave me a sympathetic glance the second she understood what had happened. That was the moment. Not the only moment. Not even the cruelest one. But it was the cleanest. The easiest to remember. Because once someone is comfortable humiliating you in public, especially in a room full of people they want to impress, it means they've already been disrespecting you in private for a long time. If you've ever had a moment where something small told you everything, you probably already understand what I mean. If you're listening from somewhere quiet tonight, or even folding laundry or driving home, stay with me. I think you'll understand this one. The gala was for the Weller Foundation, one of those polished city charities where everyone talks about community while checking who's wearing what and who's standing beside whom. Daniel loved those events. He loved any room with donors, cameras, engraved nameplates, and people who mistook confidence for substance. Officially, he was the executive director of the Ashby Arts Council in Savannah. Publicly, he was warm, articulate, civic-minded, impossible not to admire for about 15 minutes at a time. He knew how to shake a hand and hold eye contact half a second longer than most people. He knew how to mention a scholarship program while a photographer was nearby. He knew how to laugh with his head tilted slightly down, like he was humble. People adored that version of him. I used to adore it too. Or maybe not adore. Maybe believe in it. There's a difference. When I met Daniel, I was 28 and working full-time at a regional conservation archive. Most people hear that and think filing cabinets, dust, and quiet women in cardigans. Some of that is true. I do like cardigans. I also like climate-controlled storage, handwritten provenance notes, and knowing exactly where something is when everyone else assumes it's lost. I have always been good with records. Good with details. Good at seeing what people skip. Daniel liked telling people I was the organized one. It sounded affectionate when he said it. Harmless. For years, I let it pass. Then gradually, over time, it became his favorite way to reduce me into a function. Claire keeps us organized. Claire handles the boring stuff. Claire loves being behind the scenes. I don't, for the record, love being behind the scenes. I just got used to surviving there. By the time of that gala, Daniel and I had been married for 11 years. No children. Not by accident, and not by tragedy either. Just one of those private decisions that other people treat like a public mystery. We had a townhouse in a historic district, dark green shutters, narrow stairs, a courtyard barely big enough for 2 iron chairs, and a lemon tree that never really committed to being alive. From the outside, our life looked tidy. Inside it had been shifting for years. The first shifts were easy to explain away. Daniel started correcting me in front of people. Small things. Dates. Pronunciations. Stories I had been there for. Then he started leaving me out of conversations that were partly built on work I had done for him. Then came the polished jokes. My wife's allergic to spotlight. Claire would rather catalog the room than enjoy it. She's wonderful, just not really a people person. Everyone would laugh softly because none of it sounded sharp enough to object to. That was one of Daniel's gifts. He never cut where people could easily see blood. His mother, Evelyn, was the same way. Evelyn Maddox was one of those women who never said anything openly crude. She preferred polished dismissals, silk blouses, pearl earrings, private little smiles that told you exactly where you ranked without ever giving you a sentence you could repeat back to anyone later. At our wedding, she had kissed my cheek and said, "You're very pretty in a serious way." For years, I wondered what that meant. By year 5 of my marriage, I understood it meant acceptable, but not impressive. Evelyn had wanted someone more socially useful for Daniel. Someone louder, shinier, more strategic. A woman who could host 12 people without looking tired and remember which judge played tennis with which developer. I was pleasant at dinners. I wrote thank you notes. I brought good wine. But I was never her kind of woman because I was not interested in performing wealth for people I didn't even like. She never forgave me for that. And Daniel, over time, started sounding more and more like her. That gala in October was supposed to celebrate the council's capital campaign. Daniel had been talking about it for months. He kept calling it a turning point night. New donors, new board appointments, press coverage. A major museum partnership announcement that he had been obsessing over like it was the key to his entire future. 3 days before the event, I asked what time he wanted me ready. He was standing in our kitchen, scanning something on his phone, tie draped around his neck, not looking at me. "Actually," he said, "I may need you there earlier." "For what?" He finally glanced up. "Just some logistical cleanup." The check-in table had a staffing issue. I remember drying my hands slowly on a dish towel. "You want me to work the event?" "Not work," he said, already defensive. "Just help. You're good at this kind of thing." "This kind of thing?" I asked, "Am I attending with you or helping run it?" He gave me a tight smile. "Claire, does there have to be a difference?" That told me everything. Still, I went. Of course I went. That was one of my flaws then. I kept believing there was a version of events where decency would return if I stayed calm enough. I arrived early in a black dress I had worn once before to a university dinner. Simple, long-sleeved, fitted at the waist. Nothing dramatic. I had pinned my grandmother's brooch near my left shoulder, a small gold leaf with one missing stone. It was the only piece of jewelry I wore that meant anything. My grandmother used to say a woman should own 3 things in this world without apology: her name, her work, and one piece of gold no one else gets to price. I still think about that. When I got there, Daniel barely acknowledged what I was wearing. He handed me a packet, asked me to check table assignments, and disappeared toward the stage with 2 trustees and a woman from local media. I stood in the foyer for almost 40 minutes fixing a seating chart that should have been finalized the day before. The event manager thanked me twice. One of the junior volunteers assumed I worked for the venue and asked where extra programs were stored. I corrected her gently. She looked embarrassed. I almost felt sorry for her. Then I found the place card. Staff. I should probably tell you that by then I had already been noticing things. The late-night texts Daniel angled away from me. The private meetings that never appeared on the council calendar. The way he had started saying my name differently in public, like he was introducing a cousin instead of his wife. The way he flinched when I touched his arm at one fundraiser in September, not because he was angry, but because he was distracted by who was watching. There was also a woman. There is almost always a woman in stories like this, though usually she arrives after the disrespect has already begun. In my case, her name was Talia Voss. She was 31, recently appointed to some development committee title that sounded larger than it was, and she wore expensive minimalism the way some women wear perfume. You noticed her because she wanted you to. Talia was never openly inappropriate with Daniel in front of me. That would have required courage. What she did instead was more refined. She'd stand a little too close. Finish his sentences. Referred to private planning conversations I hadn't been included in. Once, at a luncheon, she smiled at me and said, "You're so lucky." He really shines when he has the right support around him. Support. That word again. I looked at her for a second too long and said, "Yes." People usually do. She laughed, but her face changed. I didn't say anything to Daniel about her at first, because I wanted to be sure. Also because after enough years with a man like him, You learn that accusing too early only teaches him where to hide things better. So I watched. That was another thing I was good at. Watching which credit card he used where. Watching when he came home smelling like hotel soap instead of office air. Watching his calendar gaps. Watching the stories people told around him that didn't line up. But at the gala, none of that had resolved yet into something solid. I still only had impressions. Off notes. That particular female instinct people like to mock until it turns out to be completely right. When Daniel told me not to make things awkward, I could feel several people nearby pretending not to listen. One of the donors' wives had gone very still beside the auction table. The woman from event security looked down at her clipboard. The waiter behind me started polishing a glass that was already clean. That kind of silence is its own witness. I asked Daniel one question. Is Talia sitting at your table? He hesitated. Only for a second. But I saw it. Yes, he said. She's there because of the museum people. It's strategic. Strategic. I nodded once. Of course. Then I picked up my place card, turned it over in my hand, and set it back down exactly where I'd found it. I wish I could tell you I walked out right then. I didn't. What I did was quieter than that. I took my seat at the back table. I spoke kindly to the security coordinator, whose name was Marisol. I thanked the catering supervisor when he offered me sparkling water. I watched Daniel give his opening remarks from the stage, one hand resting on the podium, his voice warm and practiced, talking about stewardship, legacy, public trust. Public trust. That phrase landed differently for me even then. Because Daniel had no idea what I already knew about trust, or records, or what happens when polished people get sloppy because they think the person beside them is too loyal to look closely. Halfway through the dinner, I saw Talia laugh at something Daniel whispered to her. Evelyn was at the same table in deep blue satin, pleased with the optics, pleased with herself. There was an empty chair on Daniel's other side that by every normal expectation should have been mine. I sat in the back corner and listened to applause. And somewhere between the salad course and the dessert service, while my husband accepted praise for work I knew the inside of better than anyone in that room, I stopped feeling hurt and started feeling clear. There's a difference there too. Hurt still wants to be chosen. Clarity doesn't. On the drive home, Daniel talked for 12 straight minutes about donor momentum and press placement and how well the room responded to his remarks. He didn't ask why I was quiet. He didn't apologize for the place card. He didn't mention Talia once. At a red light near Drayton Street, he finally said, I know tonight wasn't ideal, but sometimes optics matter. I turned my head and looked at him. The dashboard light cut across his face just enough for me to see how certain he was that I would absorb that sentence the way I had absorbed everything else. Sometimes optics matter. I said, very calmly, yes. They do. He nodded, as if we were in agreement. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the insult itself. Not even the table. It was the confidence. The complete confidence that I would continue protecting a version of him that only existed because I had spent years doing exactly that. He had no idea how much I knew. No idea what I had access to. No idea what I had already started noticing. And absolutely no idea that by the time he decided he was ready to push me fully out of my own life, I was no longer confused. I was paying attention. And once I started, I didn't stop. After the gala, nothing changed on the surface. That was the part most people wouldn't understand unless they've lived inside a marriage that slowly turns into a performance. There isn't always a fight. There isn't always a dramatic moment where someone admits what they're doing. Sometimes things just keep moving forward exactly the same way, except you start noticing how much of it is built on you staying quiet. Daniel kept going to work every morning in the same gray suit rotation. Evelyn kept calling once a week to ask questions that sounded polite, but always ended with some version of advice I hadn't asked for. We kept attending the same dinners, the same fundraisers, the same Sunday brunches where everyone talked about property values and travel plans like those were the only measures of a life. If anything, Daniel became nicer for a while after the gala. That should have told me even more than the place card. He started bringing home flowers on random Thursdays. Not my kind of flowers, either. Bright, expensive arrangements that looked like they'd been chosen by someone who didn't actually know what I liked. He asked if I wanted to go out to dinner more often. He started using my name again when he introduced me to people instead of just saying my wife. On the outside, it looked like effort. On the inside, it felt like adjustment. Like he was shifting pieces on a board. I didn't confront him. I didn't ask about Talia. I didn't bring up the seating card again. I went to work, came home, cooked when I felt like it, ordered takeout when I didn't, and started doing something I hadn't done in years. I started keeping notes. Not in some dramatic way. Not because I was planning anything at first. It was just a habit I'd always had from my job. At the archive, everything depends on documentation. Dates matter. Sources matter. If you don't write something down when it happens, later it turns into guesswork, and guesswork turns into mistakes. So I started writing down small things. What time Daniel said he'd be home. What time he actually walked in. Which events he told me about in advance, and which ones I heard about from someone else. When he mentioned Talia's name. When he avoided it. At first, it felt ridiculous. Like I was turning my own marriage into a file folder. Then one night in November, I saw something that made the whole habit stop feeling ridiculous. Daniel had left his laptop open on the dining table. He almost never did that. He was careful about his phone, careful about his email, careful about anything that left a record. But that night he'd come in late, dropped his bag on the chair, said he was exhausted, and gone upstairs without closing the screen. I wasn't looking for anything. That's the truth. I walked past the table, saw my name in the subject line of an email, and stopped. The message wasn't from him. It was from the Ashby Arts Council's finance office. The subject read, Updated Authorization List, effective January. I shouldn't have opened it, but my name was there. So I did. The email was short. Just an attachment and one line from the treasurer asking Daniel to confirm the revised signature authority for the new fiscal year. I opened the attachment. It took me maybe 10 seconds to understand what I was looking at. For years, I had been listed as a secondary signatory on certain council accounts. Nothing huge. Mostly because I'd helped Daniel with administrative work early in his tenure when they were understaffed. I wasn't on payroll, but everyone knew I handled records well, so they had added my name for convenience. The updated list didn't include me. In fact, my name had been removed from every account, replaced by one person, Talia Voss. I read the document twice, then a third time. The effective date was December 1st. No one had told me. Daniel hadn't mentioned it. The council hadn't contacted me. My name had just quietly disappeared from the paperwork like I'd never been involved at all. I closed the file, put the laptop exactly the way I found it, and went upstairs. Daniel was already in bed, scrolling through his phone. I stood in the doorway for a second before speaking. You changed the authorization list at the council? He didn't look up right away. That half-second pause again. The same one from the gala. Yeah, he said. We restructured a few things. You took my name off. Now he looked at me. It wasn't personal, Claire. It's just cleaner this way. The board wanted fewer unofficial connections. Unofficial connections. I leaned against the doorframe. And Talia is official. He gave me a tired smile. She's on the development committee now. It makes sense. Makes sense. I nodded slowly, the way I do when I'm making sure I understand exactly what someone is choosing to say. You could have told me. I didn't think it mattered, he said. That sentence sat in the air between us for a long time. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, okay, turned off the light and went to bed. But I didn't sleep much that night, because that was the first time the pattern stopped feeling emotional and started feeling structural. This wasn't just about being embarrassed at a gala or excluded from a table. This was about being removed from things I had helped build, one quiet form at a time, while everyone assumed I would keep smiling because I always had. And once you see that, you start looking at everything differently. The next week at work, I stayed late and pulled my own personnel file. Not because I thought anything was wrong there, just because I wanted to remind myself of something. My job at the Coastal Preservation Archive wasn't glamorous, but it was solid. I had been there 9 years. I supervised 2 junior staff members. I managed intake records for private collections and historical donations. My name was on more catalog revisions than I could count. And more importantly, I had access to the kind of systems most people forget exist: property records, donation agreements, grant filings, endowment reports, insurance appraisals, legal transfers. Not secrets. Nothing illegal. Just information that becomes very clear if you know where to look and how to read it. Daniel used to joke that I knew more about the city's history than the mayor. What he never understood was that I also knew how to follow paper trails. I didn't go digging right away. For a while, I just watched. December came, and with it the holiday season that always made Daniel even busier than usual. More events. More dinners. More nights where he said he'd be late and didn't bother explaining why. Talia's name came up more often. Always in professional contexts, of course. Talia's handling donor outreach now. Talia's coordinating the museum meeting. Talia stayed late to finish the grant proposal. One night in mid-December, Evelyn invited us to her house for dinner. Her dining room always looked like a magazine spread. White tablecloth. Silver polished so bright you could see a reflection in the spoon. Candles that never seemed to drip wax. She poured wine, looked at Daniel, then at me, and said in that soft voice of hers, "I hear the council is making some wonderful changes." Daniel smiled. "We're moving forward." Evelyn nodded approvingly. Fresh energy can do that. Her eyes flicked to me for half a second. Fresh energy. I set my glass down carefully so my hand wouldn't shake. "And old energy?" I asked. She smiled without showing teeth. "Oh, Claire, you know what I mean." Yes, I did. After dinner, while Daniel and Evelyn talked in the living room about donors and board appointments, I stood in the kitchen rinsing plates that didn't need rinsing. Evelyn came in a minute later and stood beside me, folding a dish towel with slow, precise movements. "You've been very quiet lately," she said. "I've been busy." "With what?" "Work." She gave a small laugh. "Of course." We stood there for a moment in silence. Then she said, very gently, you know, "Daniel has a lot of pressure on him right now. Big opportunities. Important people watching. This is not really the time for complications." Complications. I dried my hands and turned to face her. "I'm not a complication." Her smile didn't change. "No, dear. You're just not the center of this particular moment." That was the first time she said it that clearly. Not cruel. Not loud. Just factual, the way she saw it. I looked at her for a long second, then nodded. Good to know. When we left that night, Daniel didn't ask what we talked about. He was too busy checking messages on his phone. Back at the townhouse, he went straight to his office to finish something. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my notebook. For the first time, I didn't just write what had happened. I wrote what I thought it meant. Removed from accounts. Removed from seating. Removed from decisions. Mother says I'm not the center anymore. I stared at the page for a while. Then I wrote one more line. Find out what changed. That was the moment the watching turned into something else. Not revenge. Not anger. Just clarity. And once I started looking with that kind of clarity, it didn't take long to realize that the story Daniel was telling everyone about his success didn't match the records at all. The first thing I learned once I started checking records on purpose was that success looks very different on paper than it does in a ballroom. At the archive, we occasionally handled private collections tied to city grants, museum partnerships, or nonprofit funding agreements. That meant I sometimes saw filings connected to organizations Daniel worked with, including the Ashby Arts Council. Not in a way that broke any rules. Everything I accessed was part of normal intake processing. But when you know exactly what you're looking at, ordinary documents can tell you a lot. In January, a grant renewal packet came through our office for preservation funding tied to one of the council's renovation projects. I wasn't even assigned to it at first. One of the junior staff members put it on my desk because the legal language was confusing, and she knew I was used to reading that kind of thing. I opened the folder expecting routine paperwork. Instead, I saw Daniel's signature on 3 different financial statements that didn't match each other. Not dramatically. Just enough to make me stop. One listed the council's operating reserve at a number I knew was higher the last time I helped with their reports years earlier. Another showed a short-term loan I had never heard Daniel mention. The third included a donor pledge marked as received even though the date column was blank. None of that meant fraud. It meant inconsistency. And inconsistency in organizations that depend on public trust is never small. I closed the folder, sat back in my chair, and let myself think for a minute. The old version of me would have told Daniel immediately, asked if everything was okay, offered to help fix whatever paperwork had gone wrong. The version of me sitting there that afternoon didn't pick up the phone. She opened a blank legal pad instead and wrote down 3 numbers. Reserve. Loan. Pledge. Then she wrote the date. That night at home, Daniel was in a good mood. He had opened a bottle of wine before I even got my coat off, which usually meant he wanted to celebrate something or distract from something. Big week, he said. We're finalizing the museum partnership. That's good, I said. He leaned against the counter, watching me like he was trying to decide how much to say. We may have to move some things around to make the timing work, but it's worth it. Move some things around. What things? I asked. Just budget stuff. Temporary. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the table. You took out a short-term loan? He froze for half a second. Then he laughed. Where did you hear that? I saw the filing. He studied my face. You still look at that stuff? Sometimes it comes across my desk. He exhaled slowly, then waved his hand like it didn't matter. It's nothing. Bridge funding. The board approved it. How much? Claire, how much? He hesitated. 200. 200,000. I nodded once. And the reserve? It's fine. It's lower. It's being used. For what? He took a sip of wine, buying time. For the expansion. You know that. I held his eyes. And the donor pledge you listed as received? That one hit harder. His smile faded. You're reading too much into paperwork. I'm reading exactly what's there. We stood there looking at each other across the kitchen table that had been ours for 11 years. Finally, he said, quieter now, this is why I didn't want you involved anymore. There it was. Not angry. Not loud. Just honest enough to matter. Because I ask questions? I said. Because you worry, he said. Because you don't understand how these things work at this level. At this level. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, you used to say I kept you from making mistakes. That was before everything got bigger. Bigger. I looked down at my glass for a second, then back at him. Daniel, are you in trouble? He stared at me like I'd said something offensive. No, are you behind on something? No, are you covering something? His jaw tightened. You need to stop. Stop what? Digging. This isn't your job anymore. There it was again. Not your job anymore. I nodded slowly. Okay. He looked relieved, which told me everything. Because men who are telling the truth don't relax when you stop asking questions. That night, after he went to bed, I sat in the living room with my notebook and wrote down every number I could remember from the filings. Loan amount. Reserve balance. Pledge date. Project name. Then I wrote one sentence under it. Check everything. I didn't break any rules. I didn't hack anything. I didn't sneak into offices. I didn't open files I wasn't allowed to see. I just paid attention to what came through normal channels, and when something didn't make sense, I followed the public record. City permits, grant reports, tax filings, property transfers, nonprofit disclosures. It took about 3 weeks before the pattern started to show itself. The museum expansion Daniel kept talking about was behind schedule. The contractor payments were late. One donor had reduced their pledge. Another hadn't paid at all. And the loan wasn't just a bridge. It was covering a gap. A big one. I remember sitting at my desk one evening after everyone else had left, the office lights dim, the hum of the climate control loud in the quiet room, staring at a spreadsheet printout and realizing something that made my stomach drop. Daniel wasn't just under pressure. He was exposed. Not publicly yet. Not officially. But the kind of exposed that only takes one audit, one complaint, one missed payment to turn into a problem nobody can smooth over. I sat there for a long time, holding the edge of the desk with both hands. Part of me wanted to go home and tell him everything I had found. Part of me wanted to help him fix it before anyone else noticed. Part of me wanted to protect him. And that was the moment I understood something I should have understood years earlier. He had already stopped protecting me. The place card, the accounts, the way Evelyn talked about me, the way Talia was suddenly everywhere, the way my name disappeared from decisions I used to be part of. He wasn't treating me like a partner anymore. He was treating me like someone who had already been moved out of the picture, just not officially yet. I went home that night and didn't say a word about what I knew. Daniel was on the couch with his laptop, typing fast, barely looking up when I walked in. "Long day?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded, still staring at the screen. "Same here." I stood there for a second, watching him. Watching the man I had spent 11 years helping look successful. Watching the man who had told a ballroom full of donors that public trust mattered. Watching the man who thought I was too small to notice when the numbers stopped adding up. I went upstairs, changed into pajamas, and came back down with my tea. He didn't look up again. That was when the decision finally settled. Not in anger. Not in panic. Just clear. I wasn't going to accuse him. I wasn't going to warn him. I wasn't going to fix anything for him. I was going to make sure I understood everything. Every document. Every account. Every signature. Every risk. Because if my husband was building something that could fall apart, I needed to know exactly where I was standing when it did. I opened my notebook again that night and wrote one line across the top of a new page. Do not react. Verify first. Then under it, I wrote the next step. Check the board records. That was the moment the story stopped being about hurt and started becoming about timing. Checking the board records was harder, but not impossible. Nonprofit boards leave paper trails whether they mean to or not. Meeting minutes, approval notes, grant disclosures, donor acknowledgements. Most of it isn't secret. It's just scattered, filed in different places, written in language that sounds official enough to make people stop reading halfway through. I didn't rush. For the next month, I let things move the way they were already moving. Daniel stayed busy, busier than I had ever seen him. Late nights. Weekend meetings. Phone calls he took in the hallway instead of the kitchen. Talia's name came up almost every day now, always attached to something important. Talia's coordinating the museum donors. Talia stayed late with me finishing the proposal. Talia's been a huge help lately. Every time he said it, he watched my face for a reaction. I stopped giving him one. That was the first change he noticed. One night in February, we were at another fundraiser, smaller than the gala, but the same kind of crowd. Same smiles, same polished conversations, same quiet ranking of who mattered and who didn't. We were standing near the bar when one of the trustees, a man named Howard Briggs, shook Daniel's hand and said, "You've got a big month coming. Audit's going to be interesting." Daniel's smile didn't move, but I felt his arm stiffen beside me. "Routine," Daniel said lightly. Howard laughed. "They're never routine when expansion money's involved." He glanced at me, polite but distracted, then turned back to Daniel. "Board wants everything clean before the museum signs. Everything clean." I didn't say anything. I just picked up my glass and took a sip of water like I hadn't heard a word. On the drive home, Daniel talked too much. That was always his tell. He started explaining things I hadn't asked about. How audits worked. How the board worried about details that didn't matter. How big projects always looked messy before they came together. I let him talk. When he finally ran out of explanations, he said, "You've been really quiet lately." "I've been busy." "With what?" "Work." He nodded, like that answer fit the story he preferred. He never asked what kind of work. That weekend, while he was at the office, I went back to the archive and pulled the public board filings for the last 2 years. I wasn't looking for a scandal. I was looking for patterns. And I found one. Daniel had been approving transfers between project accounts to cover shortfalls. Temporary adjustments, always labeled temporary. Money moved from one grant to another. Pledges counted early. Expenses delayed. Reserves used before they were supposed to be touched. None of it illegal by itself. All of it risky together. And the more I read, the clearer something else became. If the audit went badly, The responsibility would land on the executive director, Daniel, not the board, not the donors, not the development committee. Him. I sat there with the files spread across the desk and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not anger, relief. Because for the first time in months, I knew exactly where the ground was. And I knew I wasn't standing on the part that was about to break. That night, I started doing something else. I separated my life. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone could point to. I opened a new bank account in my own name. I moved the small inheritance my grandmother had left me years earlier, money I had never mixed with our household account. I changed the automatic deposit for my paycheck. I made copies of every document that had my name on it, from the mortgage to the insurance policies to the old council authorization forms that still listed me. Then I put everything in one folder. Not hidden, just mine. A week later, Daniel came home earlier than usual. He looked tired, the kind of tired that sits behind the eyes. "We need to talk," he said. I was at the kitchen table with my notebook open, writing down grocery things I didn't really need. "Okay." He stood there for a second, like he was deciding how to say something he had rehearsed. "The board wants to move faster on the restructuring." "What restructuring?" "The council. The expansion. Everything." I waited. "They think it would be better if I didn't have distractions right now." "Distractions." I closed the notebook slowly. "What kind of distractions?" He didn't look at me when he said it. "Personal ones." Silence filled the kitchen. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the clock over the stove ticking, the faint sound of a car passing outside. "You mean me," I said. He finally looked up. "This isn't about you." "It sounds like it is." He rubbed his forehead, frustrated. "Claire, I need everything clean right now. No complications, no questions, no tension at home." Tension at home. I almost smiled. "And how do you plan to make that happen?" He hesitated. Then he said it. "I think we should separate for a while." The word landed softer than the place card had. Maybe because by then I had already seen it coming. "For how long?" I asked. "I don't know. Until things settle." "And where would I go?" "You could stay with your sister. Or we could figure something out." "We." I nodded once. "And this has nothing to do with Talia." His face changed just enough to confirm everything. "This isn't about her." Of course it wasn't. It was about optics. It was about audits. Donors. Board members. Museum contracts. Fresh energy. I stood up, walked to the sink, and rinsed my cup even though it was already clean. "When?" I asked. "As soon as possible would be best." Of course it would. I turned the water off and faced him. "Okay." He blinked. "Okay. Yes. That's it. That's it." He stared at me like he didn't recognize the person in front of him. "You're not going to argue? No, you're not even upset?" I looked at him for a long second. "I think we passed that part a while ago." He didn't know what to say to that. Neither did I. Over the next 2 weeks, I packed slowly. Not in anger. Not in secret. Just carefully. Clothes. Books. My grandmother's brooch. My notebooks. The folder with my documents. Daniel stayed busy, almost relieved. He told people we were taking some time. Evelyn called once to say she hoped we were handling things maturely. Talia never called, but her name started appearing in photos from council events where I used to stand beside him. I moved into a small apartment across town at the beginning of March. 1 bedroom. 2nd floor. Windows that looked out over a parking lot and a strip of trees behind it. Quiet. For the first time in years, I slept without waiting for the sound of the front door opening at midnight. 2 weeks later, the audit happened. I didn't go looking for the results. They found me. I was at work when my supervisor came into my office holding a file. "You know the Ashby Council, right?" "Yes. They just requested copies of the preservation grant records from last year. Urgent." I felt my pulse slow instead of speed up. "Okay." She set the file on my desk. "Something's going on over there." I opened the folder, already knowing what I was going to see. Numbers. Dates. Transfers. All the same ones I had written down weeks earlier. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I let it ring once before answering. "Hello." His voice sounded different. Tight. Controlled. Have you seen anything about the audit? Yes. Silence. They're asking questions, he said. I know. Another pause. I might need some help going through the old records. You understand those files better than anyone. There it was. Not wife. Not partner. Useful again. I looked out the window at the trees behind the parking lot, branches moving in the wind. You said I was a distraction, I said quietly. That was before. Before. I closed my eyes for a second. What do you need, Daniel? I just need to make sure everything lines up before the board meeting next week. Board meeting. Witnesses. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and steady. Send me the list, I said. Really? Yes. Relief rushed into his voice. Thank you. Claire, I knew I could count on you. I hung up, set the phone on the desk, and opened my notebook. On a clean page, I wrote one sentence. Board meeting next week. Then under it, I wrote the last thing I needed to remind myself. Do not fix it. Let the truth stand. The board meeting was on a Thursday morning. Daniel sent me the document list the same night he called. 12 items. Grant reports, transfer approvals, reserve statements, donor confirmations. All things I had already seen in one form or another. All things I knew didn't line up the way he thought they did. He expected me to help him smooth it out. For 11 years, that's exactly what I would have done. I would have stayed up half the night reorganizing files, rewriting explanations, finding ways to make messy numbers look intentional. I would have told myself I was protecting us, protecting the life we built, protecting his reputation because it was tied to mine. But that life had already been rearranged without asking me. Staff at the back table, removed from the accounts, told I was a distraction, asked to leave my own house because the timing wasn't right for him. So this time, I didn't fix anything. I read the list carefully, pulled the requested records exactly as they existed, and sent copies to the council office the next morning with a short note. Attached are the documents requested. All files are original archive copies. Please let me know if anything else is needed. No explanations. No corrections. No warnings. Just the truth, exactly the way it was written. Daniel called that afternoon. You sent them already? Yes. You didn't adjust anything? No silence. I thought you were going to go through them first. I did. And they match the archive. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, he said finally. That's fine. That's fine. His voice didn't sound fine. The board meeting was closed, but in a city the size of Savannah, closed doesn't mean quiet. By the end of the day, I knew it hadn't gone well. I didn't hear it from Daniel first. I heard it from Marisol, the same security coordinator who had been at my table the night of the gala. She texted me around 6 that evening. Heard there was trouble at the council today. You okay? I stared at the message for a long time before answering. I'm fine. What did you hear? She called instead of texting back. They kept him in there for almost 3 hours, she said. Finance committee, 2 trustees, the museum people, everyone. Nobody's saying details, but it sounded bad. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear. Bad how? Like numbers not matching bad. Like donors asking questions bad. I closed my eyes. Thank you for telling me. You sure you're okay? Yes. There was a small pause. You didn't deserve what happened at that gala, she said quietly. I never forgot that. Neither did I. We hung up, and I sat there for a while in the quiet apartment, listening to the sound of my neighbor's TV through the wall. For the first time since the place card, I felt something close to calm. Not because anything had gone wrong, because nothing had. Everything had gone exactly the way it was supposed to go once I stopped holding it together for him. Daniel didn't call that night. He called the next morning. I was at the archive, labeling a box of photographs, when my phone buzzed on the desk. His name on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello. His voice sounded like it had been scraped thin. They're opening a full review. I didn't say anything. They think the transfers should have been approved differently. They want explanations for everything going back 2 years. I see. I might have to step back until it's sorted out. Step back. Not fired. Not yet. Just not shining anymore. That makes sense, I said. He let out a breath that sounded like he had been holding it all night. Claire, I need to ask you something. I waited. Can we meet? In person. I looked at the photograph in my hand, a black and white picture of a storefront from 1948, the edges worn, the date written carefully in pencil on the back. When? I asked. Tonight. We met at a coffee shop halfway between my apartment and the townhouse. He was already there when I walked in, sitting at a small table near the window. He looked older. Not dramatically, not like someone in a movie, just tired in a way that didn't go away when he straightened his shoulders. He stood when he saw me. Hi. Hi. We sat down. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, they're saying the audit might go to the board of trustees for the museum too. I nodded. That could affect the partnership. Yes. And if that happens, I don't know what happens next. He looked at me like he was waiting for the old version of me to step in. The one who solved things. The one who made everything make sense again. Why did you send those files like that? He asked finally. They asked for the originals. You knew they didn't look good. Yes. You could have helped me explain them. I held his eyes. You didn't want my help before. His jaw tightened. This isn't the same. It feels the same. Silence stretched between us. People moved around the shop, cups clinking, the low sound of music playing somewhere behind the counter. He leaned forward. Claire, I made mistakes. I know that. But you didn't have to just let it happen. There it was. Let it happen. I folded my hands on the table. You let it happen a long time ago, I said. What does that mean? You decided I wasn't part of your life anymore. You just didn't say it out loud until it was convenient. That's not fair. You moved me out of the accounts. You put me at the staff table. You told me I was a distraction. You asked me to leave the house. He looked down at the table. I thought you understood the pressure I was under. I did, I said. I just stopped protecting you from it. He looked up again, eyes sharp now. So this is revenge. No, then what is it? I took a slow breath. It's the truth without me fixing it first. He stared at me like he wanted to argue, but didn't know where to start. After a moment, he said quietly, I thought you'd always have my back. I nodded. I did. For 11 years. And now? I thought about the gala. The place card. Evelyn in the kitchen. The empty chair beside him. The files on my desk. The night he told me I was a distraction. Now I have my own. We sat there for a long time without speaking. Finally he said, they might ask me to resign. I'm sorry, I said. And I meant it. Not because he didn't deserve the consequences. Because once, a long time ago, he had been someone I believed in. He nodded slowly, like he understood that difference. We finished our coffee in silence, stood up, and walked to the door together. Outside, the air was cool, the kind of early spring evening where the light fades slowly instead of all at once. He stopped on the sidewalk. I don't know what happens now, he said. I do. He looked at me. I go home, I said, to my apartment. Tomorrow I go to work. Next week I'll probably help catalog another donation nobody else wants to sort through. That's it. That's enough. He gave a small, tired laugh. You always were better at starting over than I was. No, I said. I was just better at paying attention before things broke. We stood there for another second, then he nodded once, turned, and walked toward his car. I watched him go, not angry, not satisfied, just finished. A few months later, he stepped down from the council. Officially, it was for personal reasons. The museum partnership moved forward without him. Talia took a job in another city. Evelyn never called me again. My life got smaller, quieter, more honest. I kept the apartment, bought a second chair for the living room, put my grandmother's brooch in a small frame on the shelf instead of wearing it, just so I could see it every day. At work, nothing changed. Files came in. Boxes got labeled. Records got sorted. People forgot things, and I helped put them back where they belonged. Sometimes that's all justice is. Not a speech. Not a victory. Just everything finally sitting in the right place where no one can pretend it's something else. And for the first time in years, that was enough.